Crops genetically engineered to produce toxins that enable them to resist insect pests do not need to be sprayed with insecticides. Dude, that's cool. You modify their genes so that they produce toxins, and then you don't have to spray them. Although then, do those toxins hurt us? Anyways, are you guys cool with this so far? Yep. Pesticide-free world. Since excessive spraying of insecticides has harmed wildlife populations near croplands, using such genetically engineered crops more widely is likely to help wildlife populations to recover. You know, honestly, that seems like a pretty reasonable argument. Since excessive spraying has harmed wildlife, I guess if you start using these things, you wouldn't be excessively spraying anymore, so that seems like it would be helpful. What are we assuming, though? This does ask for an assumption. There is an assumption here. Yeah?
I was kind of thinking that you're assuming even if wildlife has been harmed, it can recover, so it's not like permanently harmed. Yeah,
like you stop doing the harmful thing, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to, because it says it is likely to help wildlife populations to recover. Maybe they're gone, right? You spray your plants with that weed be gone. I'm stopping now. I swear I won't do it ever again. They might be dead, right? They're not going to recover. So even though you've stopped, nothing happens. So the assumption is that stopping a harmful thing is helpful. It might not be. Which one following is an assumption required? So this is what type of question? Necessary assumption. So we're looking for something that absolutely has to be true. Without it, the argument fails. So do we want a strong answer or weak answer? Weak. Yeah. A, the use of crops that have been genetically engineered to resist insect pests in place of crops that have been sprayed with insecticides will cause less harm to wildlife populations. That seems like that has to be true. If they cause the same or more harm, that's not good. I would keep this open. Are we keeping this open? Okay. Okay. B. Wildlife populations that have been harmed by the excessive spraying of insecticides on croplands are likely to recover. That's the same as the conclusion. Likely to recover. Okay. If the amount of insecticides sprayed on those croplands is reduced even slightly. Wait, does it have to be assumed that they will help them recover if the amount reduced is even just a small amount? They said here that if, wait, hold on. They said since excessive spraying of insecticides has harmed wildlife populations, using such genetically engineered crops is likely to help wildlife populations to recover. In other words, we've been spraying a lot. Now we switch and we start using them more widely, right? So insecticide spraying goes down how much?
Hold on with that. Or wait, in the answer B or like
in the original?
Oh, it would go down more.
Yeah, so it's saying it's going from excessive spraying to presumably none for those species, right? Or at least those crops. So it would go down a lot, and it's saying in that situation, we are going to help wildlife recover. So this argument is assuming if you reduce insecticide spraying a lot, then you will help the wildlife to recover. Answer choice B is not a necessary assumption because we don't have to assume that it's likely to help it recover, even when it's just a little bit. Yes?
So I picked B.
Yes.
The right answer is A.
Oh, thank you.
And I don't know how I'm supposed to tell you that. The right answer is A.
No, that's great. I mean, I felt like it was a good answer, but you never know until you read the rest.
But the reason, like the issue that I had with A was because the assumption we were talking about is talking about the difference between like harming something and its ability to recover. Mm-hmm. And A doesn't address, like the conclusion is that it's likely to help recover. But A doesn't address any recovery. It's just
You're
talking
absolutely
about
right.
harm.
You're absolutely right, 100%. Can anyone explain why that doesn't matter?
Because others are bad.
No? That's not why, actually. Has to do with the question type.
Because you do have to assume this to assume.
Yeah, so in a necessary assumption, you're looking for anything that has to be assumed, no matter how random it might be. This is not a sufficient assumption question. In a sufficient assumption question, if the correct answer does not prove the conclusion, or any element of the conclusion, you're like, this is not good enough, this is not sufficient, so it's wrong. But in a necessary assumption question, you're looking for anything that has to be assumed,
So it's just like
even
the
if it doesn't do
minimum.
very much at all. Bare minimum. And so when I read A and I was like, well, does it have to be assumed that they will cause less harm? Yes, it has to be, because if they don't cause less harm, if they cause the same amount of harm or more harm, then this whole conclusion is going to fall apart. This is one of the, I feel like it's such an irony with the difference between necessary and sufficient assumption questions. Because in a necessary assumption question, you're looking for something that absolutely has to be assumed. That is the standard. So it sounds like the answer will be very constrained. But ironically, the answer choice, there are a lot of possible answers, because there are a lot of things that might need to be true even though they're not enough to help the conclusion. Whereas in a sufficient assumption question, they're saying, hey, which one of the following, if it were assumed, would allow the conclusion to be properly drawn? So you're like, oh, I can choose anything I want as long as it proves the conclusion. The reality is, the answer choices are very constrained, they're very restricted, because there are certain requirements, ironically, that they have to meet. If they don't solve these problems, they are not sufficient, and thus they are wrong. So, the correct answer in a sufficient assumption question tends to be very narrow. It tends to be, the answer can be worded very strongly, and it is worded very strongly, but there's only a few possible correct answers, maybe only one. Whereas in a necessary assumption question, there are many things that need to be assumed, there are many things that need to be assumed, and thus many things that could be correct. Does that make sense? Okay. Any other answers that we were debating here? E? If a wider use of certain crops that have been genetically engineered to resist insect pests is likely to help at least some wildlife populations to recover, it is likely to have that effect only because its use will prevent excessive and ineffective spraying of insecticides and cropland. We don't have to assume, this word right here, it is likely to have that effect only for this reason. We don't have to assume that it will help the wildlife only for these reasons. Like, if someone came along and said, well, you know what, it helps the wildlife for these reasons, but also another reason. When farmers start using these crops, they don't drive as much over their cropland or something, I don't know, and therefore the wildlife tends to do better. Like, that wouldn't hurt the conclusion. That would actually help the conclusion. I'd be like, oh, one more reason why it helps the wildlife. So does it have to be true that this is the only way that they will have that effect? No, like it could have that effect for other reasons as well. That's okay. That doesn't hurt the argument. So we don't have to assume. So this is actually too strong of an answer, which is common in necessary assumption. Okay.